And of course we put the conf folder actually on the class path also. Now if we go look at the configuration, of course we're using WebLogic, so we're going to want to use the auth WebLogic config here. Okay. The other thing we need to do is the JNDI properties. We're going to have to define those. Of course we're going to point to our WebLogic server, the admin server. Excuse me, we're going to point to the WebLogic user ID, the WebLogic password for the admin server. Okay. And that's how the client knows where it's going to go look. And then of course in the actual client tester we're going to give it the T3 to the actual OIM connection information. Okay, we're going to pass all that in. That's our XCL sysadm. Now normally what you'd want to do is probably create another properties file for these and then add some code here to load these properties that you're going to use to make the connection. But since we're just testing to see if the connection works, we're just going to hard code it here for the time being. We're actually demonstrating here the use of including libraries into the project more so than how we're going to deal with our OIM connection. We can work that out later when we actually have the real project. So, okay. So I think we have everything here we need to talk. So we're going to go ahead and run a clean build. And then we're going to go look at the results of that clean build here. Okay, so we go to the Netbeans projects. We look at the okay, and we see here now we have a dist folder with our jar file. Okay, that's the one we're actually going to run. Okay, which is going to contain the client tester that we're going to run. Okay, so if we go in here now, go in the Netbeans, go to the helper. Okay, we see here we have our run it test script. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it, and hopefully everything will work. And then we don't need /. Okay, so probably making the connection hopefully. Okay, so there we have it. Let's widen this. Oh, can't do that. Run it again. Okay, so we have we have an IT resource called demo IT resource. You can see here in the code when we call it, that's what we're asking for. So we created a demo IT resource in OIM. I added some values to it, and here you can see we're reading it and printing out the value. So there's a value. It's actually a database type. So we're going to get a driver, the database name, the password, the user ID, and the URL for the database connection. The second one is basically a lookup table. We call it demo.lookup. And we pulled that out, and we only have one value in there called the demo key, and then the demo decode value. So we were able to look up, do a lookup and load maps for both of the types, the resource properties, and get the lookup values. So if we were doing, so if we actually had some kind of wrapper around those, this is how we would do it. So if you were writing an adapter and you needed to get access to all your IT resource properties, you would build this library, you would call it AI, OIM helper, you would put that jar file somewhere, you would create a library for it, then you would actually write an OIM client, include the OIM client library plus this library, and you would write an adapter that did basically just this, that got you all the IT resource properties for your connection type that you're doing. And this is just one way to do it, an easier way to do it, because you'd be able to use this library in all your future code. And you would of course make enhancements to this as you go along, for getting users and things like that. Basically wrap the OIM API, which would make it a little bit easier to use. Okay, so that pretty much does it here. So we wrote a little demo using the OIM client. Most of this code was copied and pasted right out of the OIM 11G Developer's Guide. Okay, we just basically demonstrated using that in Netbeans and using Netbeans libraries, and then having it create a build for us that we would then write a batch script to run. Okay, we'll go over that one more time. The bat file is basically pointing to the same places where the actual libraries live. Okay, there is a way now that if we run a clean build, there's two ways that Netbeans can do a build. When you do a clean build, you can either, one, get the single jar file that you're building, or two, Netbeans can also have the ability to copy all the jar files that you've specified in your libraries and create another folder inside the disk called lib and copy all these deployment jars over to it also. If you wanted to create that kind of deployment, what you could do is you would get another file called manifest. Okay, you would copy this file into the base of the project. Okay, the next thing you would have to do is go to properties, run, and then you would have to browse for a main class. It just so happens we can use our tester class. You'd say OK, then you'd have to go edit inside NB project. There's called the project.properties. Now you could do a look for main. Okay, now here's what we just added for our main. The other thing we have to do is we have to create a manifest entry. And basically point it to that file. At least I think that's correct. Let me go double check. Okay, right, so we have to, actually it's called manifest file, so we have to fix that property. Okay, call manifest file, manifest.mf. Okay, now if we look here in our dist, you see all we have is that. So now that we have these changes in, let's do another clean build and see what we get this time. Okay, now you see we have a lib directory here. Okay, if we go look in our lib directory, you see it deployed the OIM client jar for us. So now if we needed to build a self-contained deployment with all of the libraries that we depend on to run our AI OIM helper jar, we would make those changes we just saw, where we create a main class, we create a manifest file, we point to the manifest file via the properties. Then the next time we run the build, we'll get the full distribution. And then of course we would have to change our run at bat file to point to the internal libs instead of the ones we're including externally. So it's really just a matter of taste, or depending on how you need to do the deployment. So you have the ability to do that, and basically that's what we're demonstrating here, the ability to do that, not the right or wrong answer of how you would do it, but how you would go about doing it if you needed to. Okay, so I think that pretty much sums this one up. So you can write a little OIM client, you can have libraries in Netbeans that you can use to compile things. You showed how to build deployments, how to have deployments include those libraries that you need, and make a self-contained deployment for it. Okay, that's it, folks. More to come.